Welcome to Politically Basic. I'm your host, Kyle Campbell. As we always do, we're breaking down the basics of all political issues so that you get to decide. We've got a great episode today. My guest is Kaleigh Kozak. She's an absolute powerhouse of a woman, mother, survivor turned fighter, patriot, and advocate. You know her as the inspiring namesake behind Kaleigh's Law. Her story is one of strength and resilience, embodying the power of determination and the profound impact that one individual can have. As a devoted wife and proud mother of 5 beautiful children, Kaleigh balances her family life with her powerful role as an influential stakeholder in the legislative process across multiple states to create and enhance laws that protect victims of sexual abuse, as well as laws to hold perpetrators and the system accountable. She's the president and founder of the Because You Still Matter organization and was a spokesperson for Arizona's Prop 313, which would ensure natural life in prison for child sex traffickers that just recently passed in the 2024 election. As a survivor of child sexual abuse herself, Kaleigh uses her voice to shed light on important issues and to champion the rights of others. I've got to admit to being pretty biased already on this one, Kaleigh. I'm really glad to have you on the show. I have so many questions for you. Thank you very much for being with us today on Politically Basic.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to dig into this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Well, I want to start with the basics, really, of your background and your story. So what led you to become an activist and advocate for children's safety in this way?
So in 2020, my life turned upside down because I was notified after 13 years that the man who sexually abused me as a child was motioning to have his so-called lifetime probation lifted. And I learned that if it was lifted, I would in fact be left with no option for any protection.
Incredible. And so what steps did you take? I mean, when you found that out, that must have been absolutely terrifying and devastating. What did you do? Who did you call? What was your first step?
Well, a week after I actually went to court and had to reface him after 13 years, the pandemic happened. And so everything was kind of put on hold. And every month that went by, I was so distraught over the fact that in Arizona, every third Friday was what we call Sex Offender Release Day in Arizona, and that offenders had the option to petition the court to have the terms of their lifetime probation modified or completely lifted, and that victims were having to face this reality and then finding out that they didn't have the option to have any protection if that was their reality that they were in. So in October, I was just so fed up. And I decided on October 30th that something had to be done. And so I called my local legislator's office and demanded a meeting until they scheduled me. And I met with her in December. And it was a very short meeting. And I had no idea what to think of it. And then in January, she called and said, "Hey, we drafted a bill. It's SB 1412. And that was the original bill number for Kaleigh's Law."
That is so incredible. You really must have been very effective in that short meeting with her. Tell us a little bit about Kaleigh's Law. What is it and what action does it take?
So what makes Kaleigh's Law so unique is that it gives the victim of most notably sex crimes, but also dangerous felonies, the option to petition the court at the time of sentencing for a natural life injunction. And the reason that natural life is so important is because there is no legal definition to just lifetime. And so we had to actually amend the original passing of Kaleigh's Law, SB 1412, to another bill that included natural. That way we eliminated any loopholes that existed for the perpetrator to be able to circumvent what lifetime actually meant. And so it has been a learning process, to say the least. And when I started this, I didn't know anything about politics. I was just a stay-at-home mom of 5, which is a job in itself. But I didn't know what animal was affiliated with what party. I didn't know anything about state politics. But I learned very quickly because I wanted to make sure that what we were doing was going to be effective and that no victim would have to deal with the things that I have had to deal with as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse.
Yeah, it's really incredible. Walk us through the process then of what happened. So Kaleigh's Law is introduced And were you out taking media interviews? Were you the spokesperson for this? How did that move through the channels to become past legislation then?
So the first session in 2021, everything was actually virtual. And so that was my introduction to politics, was Zoom, having to testify on Zoom. And I truly didn't know anything about the legislative process. I just knew that I wanted to make a difference. And so the first committee hearing that I testified in was the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. And I had this long speech written about why this was so important. And then the committee chairman said, "All right, Mrs. Kozak, you're up. You have 90 seconds." And I about fell over backwards. 90 seconds? How can you get anything out in 90 seconds? Let me tell you, I have become a pro at knocking out a testimony in 90 seconds. But I've been doing this now this will be my fifth legislative session that I've worked on this. So I had no help other than the bill sponsor, who she really walked me through everything. And looking back, I was so intentional, which I think was good because I didn't understand how it worked, but I was there and a part of every step. And I'll never forget, her name is Senator Sina Kerr, her telling me, well, this is going to be a journey and it's going to be an uphill battle. It might take a couple of years. And the original bill number, SB 1412, actually passed in 4 months with complete bipartisan support and was signed into law by Governor Ducey in April of 2021. And I looked at her and I said, well, that was really easy. And she said, this is not how it normally goes. And so I've learned since then that is not how it normally goes. And we will be on our 4th year of amending Kayleigh's law, because we are finding that as strong as we think it is, the system has found ways to circumvent what we have put forth. And so every session we're having to strengthen the language and really narrow the gaps and close the loopholes that exist.
It is really remarkable that you were able to move that through so quickly. You're right. It's not normal. Some states have the most intricate process to move legislation through. And it's actually hilarious to hear some people talk about some of these processes to get it done. You just absolutely fall over and take a nap listening to the process. So, well, congratulations on getting that accomplished. And really, these amendments are so good. It's great that you are staying passionate and involved and continuing to modify it, because even if you think about just the 4 years that you have been working on this, so much has happened nationally, culturally, in terms of legislation and the way that law enforcement has been kind of defunded or come against in our country, and how people who break the law, these criminals or these sex offenders, have really gotten very crafty about working around it. So I'm really glad to hear that you're continuing to just modify it and make sure it can be as strong as possible. Has this legislation impacted or kind of paved the way for other states to move forward other similar legislation, similar to this Senate bill that you had passed?
Yes. So Arizona was the first state in the nation to pass, we call it a natural life injunction in Arizona. In other states, it's called a permanent protection order, a PPO, or a PRO, a permanent restraining order. So it just depends on what state you're in. And that's also been a challenge. One that I do kind of like, because I am challenged in the challenge. Every state is so different. And so what our definition is in Arizona is different than Wisconsin, is different than California, is different than Tennessee. And so it's amazing to me how some of these other states have kind of started to push these protection orders or injunctions forward, but they're very open-ended. They're kind of vague, where I look at Kayleigh's law as the gold standard. The reason I say that is because we have been working on this for so many years, and we're serving at the time of sentencing, which is it is eliminating that re-victimization and re-traumatization for the victim. It's saving the state tons of money when it comes to serving these protection orders. It makes the crime itself enough to petition for this type of protection. You don't have to prove that thereafter you need this protection because you're in danger. It makes the crime itself. It also, a defendant in Arizona cannot take the victim back to court. They can't petition to have a hearing. And that is one thing that I think a lot of states are lacking. And it's not intentional. It's just because I don't think they've come across some of these issues that we've had. Also, we've had to draft amendments so a judge cannot seal or set aside the natural life injunction because, believe it or not, the first year this law was in effect in Arizona, we had a judge try to set a natural life injunction aside, therefore pulling that protection from the victim. And so we've just learned all these things. We had another situation where we didn't have a very specific ARS code listed within the eligible crimes, although it fell under a dangerous felony, it wasn't one. And so they actually were not able to obtain this natural life injunction under Kayleigh's law because we didn't list that specific ARS code. So we went back and we amended that, and we added stalking, strangulation, and voyeurism with their very specific ARS codes, the penal codes, so that they would be able to petition. We have an amendment coming up this year because we had unfortunately, a couple who there was attempted murder on them. And because the charges were so heavily reduced, that they were not eligible to petition under Kayleigh's law for this natural life protection from the person who attempted to murder them. And so they actually took it to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals upheld it, and they actually granted them the protection. But now we have to go back and figure out how to word this so that if a defendant does in fact have reduced charges that are obviously way less than the initial charges, that a victim is still eligible to petition under this natural life injunction.
I want to ask you your opinion on something. I'm going to take us on a little tangent here because I'm really curious. So we're out in California, and of course, we are a state that has seemed to kind of morphed into a place where we're sort of protective over people who commit crimes, or we want to be, sensitive to the circumstances that have led to that, or whatever in the world is going on in this state. But I'm just curious, if you have noticed the shift or the trend there in Arizona, or even in your work that has affected other legislation in other states, that there seems to almost be, I don't know if I want to call it like the court system is overwhelmed, or there are so many terrible crimes happening that sometimes these lesser ones, even though they're horrible, just don't seem as bad. I mean, you guys are having to get really creative and work really hard for these punishments to stick. Are you noticing that there? Is that a trend that you're seeing too there, or is that just a California thing?
I think it's everywhere. I think that's I can answer that question several different ways, but I will tell you, fun fact, California has better sex offender laws in place than Arizona.
Wow. Does it really?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh gosh.
Yes.
Well, I'm sad to hear that because ours are not excellent.
No, but I think it's very complex, and the way that Arizona laws are portrayed is not an actuality. Mm-hmm. And so I would take California, the way that they handle sex offenders, over the way Arizona handles sex offenders any day, interestingly enough. But I think what we're seeing is a combination of things. I think the courts are absolutely overwhelmed, just in general, but maybe they're overwhelmed because they're not actually implementing punishment. Right. I think the reason that they're not enforcing the law to the fullest extent is because if there's less of a consequence, there's more opportunity for the person to offend again or commit another crime, which then has them go through the whole judicial process and the system again, which all goes back to money. If we were hard on criminals from the get-go, we would narrow that gap, close a lot of the income when it comes to these type of people and this environment and this category of work. And we would see things be reduced, which would ultimately affect the money coming in. And that is my personal opinion.
No, I think that you're spot on. And then the work that you are doing with Kayleigh's Law is really trying to put the pressure on in the right ways, and it'll have a domino effect, right? All the way through the system and making things better. So we're just so glad that you're doing it. I think that what makes you so unique is that you weren't even thrust into this. I mean, you could have just buried your head in the sand and been afraid and been upset by this news, and instead you took action. And like you said, nobody held your hand through this process. You just took one step at a time and figured it out, and you've had great success. So I think that you're such a brilliant example, so inspirational of how to do this. And I think that that is something that you can really inspire the politically basic audience toward, if they have a thought or see a need and want to follow the same path that you have with legislation. Kind of walk us through that. What would you recommend someone do? What are some of these first steps that would be most effective to kind of starting to walk that same pathway that you did with this legislation?
So I think it's really important to find what you're passionate about and stay in that lane. Sex crimes and the topic of sexual abuse or trafficking or all those things, specifically, that's my passion. It's a very heavy topic. And so I really believe in staying in my lane and focusing on the policy pertaining to these crimes. It's really easy to get pulled into other things and distracted by other things because a lot of things matter. But I feel like in order to be a subject matter expert, if you will, you have to stay in your lane. I think another really important thing is that even regardless of who's in office and what the administration looks like, you have to question everything. You have to question every single word within every single bill and why it is the way that it is. One of the biggest problems I see when it comes to policy specifically is that what's portrayed is not an actuality. People will read a bill title, they'll read a headline, and they will assume that that is what's actually happening. They won't dig into the fine print. They don't have the attention span to look from this ARS code or penal code to the next one. I say ARS because that's Arizona Revised Statute. But they don't want to bounce around. It's written confusing for a reason. And that's all by a lot of this stuff when it comes to laws is by design, right? They don't want it to be convenient. They don't want committee hearings to be convenient, because the more challenging it is for the constituents, the less involved they are. There is nothing convenient and easy about showing up at the legislature, and they like to drop everything last minute, and it's all by design. And so I think finding, for someone who wants to get involved in this, finding what you're truly passionate about, and then looking at what legislators appear to be passionate about that same topic. And it doesn't always have to be someone, but it helps to have a legislator who is passionate about the specific topic that you want to invest in. And staying so on top of it, just because they come back with language that appears good, again, doing thorough research and really digging into what the language means. I would like to use the lifetime as an example. As a constituent who had no idea about anything with politics or legal language, why would I think that lifetime didn't mean lifetime? And when my parents accepted a plea deal on my behalf when I was 14, that consisted of my abuser having 2 terms of lifetime probation, they believed the system. They believed and trusted that that meant that he would be on probation for his lifetime. And we were completely blindsided when we found out that that was in fact not the reality that not only I was in, but hundreds of other, if not thousands of other victims were in.
Yeah, you are speaking so much truth right now. Thank you for saying that, because you're absolutely right. We have to be discerning and not just kind of blindly trust something coming from the government, from an agency or leadership that maybe we think when we're younger or think growing up can just automatically be trusted. So I'm really, really glad that you're saying that. And I do believe that your story is just so inspirational for other people who want to travel this path. So I appreciate you giving that advice. I want to talk to you a little bit about just some breaking news that has just come out. I want to maybe say in the last couple of days even, that the number of children who are lost and missing in our nation They're saying now is at least a 500,000, but you and I both know very well that that number in reality is a lot higher. Talk to us, Kayleigh, about just the state of children's safety today. Where and how do you think they are most vulnerable?
Oh, it gives me the chills because we know it's a reality for so many children, and it's tragic and it's awful. I do believe that our government is also involved in a lot of that. James O'Keefe had recently put something out, had the whistleblower about the multi-million dollar investment to the transportation. And I always say, there's no money to be made in protecting children. There's only money to be made in buying that or selling them. And then he said, and transporting them. And how true can that be? I think that we have been conditioned as Americans specifically. America is this great place, and it is. We're very fortunate, to live in America, but that these heinous crimes are almost off limits in America, that they would never happen here, that we don't have to worry about children being in these awful, awful situations. That couldn't be further from the truth. For people think that our children are being taken out of America. I think Sound of Freedom was great for awareness. I always say this, but it ultimately distracted our attention from what's happening right here in our own backyards to what's happening overseas. And the problem with that is that not only are children being taken out, children are being brought in for the same exact reason that they're being taken out, and that is for sex trafficking. You can sell a child how many times in a day for the reasons of sexual purposes. You can only sell drugs once. Sex trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and these children are missing for those reasons. And we have got to find a way to find them and save them.
Yeah. We are just so right in the middle of such a crisis, the immigration crisis, a border, even with a new administration coming in, that doesn't mean that everything's sealed up instantly. No. We still have an open border. It's got a tremendous effect on what we call DCST, right? Domestic child sex trafficking, which you understand this world very well. I have my own thoughts about this. This is the work that I do locally and nationally. You have such expertise in this area. What do you think, based on your just deep level of understanding, how do we get ourselves out of this mess? How do we protect our kids better in this country?
Sadly, people sometimes don't like it when I say this, but it's the truth. And I'm a realist, and that's why I think I've been so successful with like my bills and language and things. We are never going to end child sex trafficking. We're never going to end domestic abuse. We're never going to end sexual abuse. I wish that will end when Jesus returns. That's when it will end. So we have to get ahead and think of ways to prevent and have accountability. Because when we do that, we have a while to play catch up. But when we do that, we will slowly narrow the gap when it comes to these types of people committing these types of crimes, because they will think twice before they commit these crimes. And an example of that would be, people say it's natural, or they say sentence a rapist to death or a sex trafficker to death. Well, that sounds wonderful. That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen with the way that our laws are written. And they know that. They know that even if they are arrested and sentenced to death, I say that very loosely, they can appeal it. It's a whole process. It's already been deemed unconstitutional. They are fully aware that that is not an actual consequence. So why would they listen to that being a consequence when it's not a reality? If we have laws in place that are an actuality, and they truly fear for the consequences of what will happen if they are caught committing these crimes, and we'll stick with trafficking and selling and buying children for the purpose of sex, they will think twice about it.
Yeah. We have another layer added on top of this now, and that is that millions of people have come into this country from other countries with very different laws or very different understanding of consequences around some of these crimes. And so now we're seeing just a different reality when it comes to immigrants who are in the country illegally, what they're doing, but not just what they're doing, how they are being held accountable, or this horrific lack thereof of accountability. So we've had a Biden administration for 4 years, and it's been pretty remarkable to see what has been accomplished in that regard over 4 years. And now this Trump administration is coming in. Are you hopeful? And what are you hoping to see that's going to be different going forward under this new administration with regard to just making things safer for children and families?
I think a good place to start would be not allowing any type of plea deal to a lesser sentence would be a great place to start, because when these people are convicted and they have X amount of charges and then they plead down to, you know, 2 of the 20, and even those are pled down to what's in statute, we are not getting anywhere with that. So I think I would love to see this administration say, you know what, when it comes to these very specific crimes, when it comes to child sex crimes, child sex trafficking, sexual abuse of a child, we have to start somewhere. That we will not allow any plea deals that consist of anything less than what they are charged with. And if they're going to plead guilty, and people say, oh, well, then why would they plea? You know, how many cases do we see even go to trial anymore? Hardly any. And I think that would be a good place to start. And I would hope that maybe they would do that. We have a lot of work ahead of us as a country. This administration, I mean, we need to be praying for them as they tackle this, because what has come in is going to be so much harder to get out. And I don't know, there's nothing, you know, really that constituents can, everyday average people can do other than pray to help them. But we need to really hope and pray that whatever they decide that they're going to do to make America safer and better and get these illegals out, that it really works, and that we can safeguard our country as best as we possibly can. And like you said, even closing the border, they know that's coming. They've known that it's coming. So they've been plotting and planning how to circumvent that far before we even are going to close the border. So whatever, they're a couple steps ahead of us. And so let's just pray that the incoming administration has also thought ahead to these other things.
Yeah, pray, keep our heads down and keep working on this issue. But also it's an understanding that we need to continue to educate people in our country, just like what you're doing on this show today. And I'm so grateful for it. You mentioned Sound of Freedom, and I'm with you there. I think when the Taken movies came out, it scared everyone terribly. But again, we saw that as an international problem. We didn't understand it as a problem here at home in the United States. The data is telling us, and I've seen this moving in this direction for years, particularly in the state of California, which has the worst, child sex trafficking issue nationally. But the offenders, the abusers, and the traffickers, these are people these kids know. Yep. This is not always just some stranger that nabs your kid, off the corner when you're not paying attention. And a part of, what these films are portraying is showing maybe that side of it. But we've got an awareness issue here. Absolutely. In this country. And I mean, what do you think about, are we awakening to this? Are we starting to understand? And if it's not enough, and I never think it's enough, but if it's not enough, what do we need to be doing here to continue educating at home about where this is generating and what we need to do to get our hands wrapped around it?
Well, I think it is important to acknowledge that what does happen, what happens in those movies and how it's portrayed can happen. It's not impossible, but that is a very small percentage of what's happening every single day. It's 97% of victims know their perpetrator. And whether it's a family member, a friend, I think that society has been conditioned to look out for the scary guy in the van or the stranger who's creepy. That's not what we need to be teaching our children. We need to be teaching our children that to listen to their intuition and their gut feeling. We need to be teaching our children that titles and specific people within titles and entities, that doesn't mean that they're untouchable and that they're safe people. Just because someone is a doctor doesn't mean that that's a safe person. Unfortunately, I will call it a pandemic that we're seeing with these teachers sexually abusing children. And as a survivor of someone, my PE teacher sexually abused me for 2 years. And my mom was a teacher at the school.
Wow.
He groomed my family. He groomed everybody. And then when I turned him in, they all stood with him. They all took his side because they did not believe that he was capable of doing such horrible things. And so I think that we need to teach society and our children to also be aware of the charming narcissist who is not in the shadows. They are hiding in plain sight right in front of us. And do not be deceived by how they look, where they work, what they've accomplished. We can no longer turn a blind eye to the people that are telling us, they're blatantly telling us what they're interested in. And it could be through signs, it could be through their actions. There's all kinds of things, things that are just completely inappropriate that you might go, why would that adult, it just maybe, and you can't comprehend it, but listening to that and then making sure children are aware of that.
You're so right. I'm so sorry that happened to you. I know God is using your story for good and turning it all into something that's going to help a lot of other people. But you're so right. We've got to understand all of these issues: sociopaths, psychopaths, narcissists, gaslighting, grooming, all of these things. We didn't grow up knowing any of that, or understanding how nuanced it can be, and how much it can, as you say, just hide in plain sight. And people we potentially look up to or think have it, all together. It brings me to more breaking news, and I'd love your take on it. The Diddy indictments and this Epstein list that still has not been released. Is it desensitizing us because it is so extreme in both cases? And even if those lists, are released, how are we going to use that to ensure that doesn't happen again? And is that even possible? I know that's a lot of questions for you right there. Well, I really want to know all your thoughts on this issue.
I love that you use the word desensitized, because we are being desensitized every single day to these heinous crimes that are happening every day. I mean, you hear, another teacher, and what do you think? Oh, there's another one. It doesn't even faze us anymore because we are so used to seeing it every day in the news or on social media. Or look at these predator catchers that are out there going crazy, right? Like, we're like, oh, there's another one. We're not even surprised by it anymore. And so I think that's a really, really over the target word. It's perfect. Desensitization is huge with this when it comes to this category. And that's not a good thing. It's actually a really bad thing for us, for our kids, for society as a whole. As far as the Epstein list, I don't think we'll ever see it. I think for a number of reasons, they'll redact pieces of it, they'll steal it, even if it was fully, made to the public. I think it depends on where it is, if it's federal, there's so many stipulating things to it. Are there victims coming forward? What kind of proof? So even if they're on this list, what kind of proof is there that that person actually committed this crime on the Epstein Island? I think it's just so complex. I don't think we'll ever see the list. Yeah. That's my opinion. Yeah. And even if we do, I don't think anything will be done from it. With Diddy and Jay-Z, oh, girl, I think it's just the tip of the iceberg. I know. That's my opinion. I do think that specifically Diddy will be prosecuted. To what extent, I don't know. I don't think he's getting out of anything. But I think that it's just, honestly, he was the one who drew the short stick, and they went after him for whatever reason. And I'm going to be totally transparent. I don't know all the details of that case, just because of the bandwidth and a lot of things that I have going on. I haven't dug into it, but I do think that for whatever reason, he was targeted in that, and that he will be prosecuted. And Jay-Z is the other one, right? The lawsuit.
Yeah, there are a lot of people in the music industry who seemed to kind of have to pass through Diddy as a gatekeeper to success and fame. And the price that you paid were these horrific parties, abuse, being drugged, awful things happening. And that he, if anyone should go down, it does sound like Diddy should be the one. My hope is that it just scares everyone straight, at least for a while. Because I think, maybe our proximity to Hollywood and all of this industry and knowing people there, I think people kind of knew. They sort of knew, and it was a not so well kept secret. But I'm hopeful that the shock over it sets us straight just a little bit as a society. Like it was really bad. It was really bad. So I'm glad he's arrested. I'm glad they're trying to kind of flesh all of this out and clean it out. I think any movement on it is going to be good.
Yes.
But I think you're right also with the Epstein list. You have people with too much money and too much power and too much influence trying to cover it up. And you said it, this is a problem that's going to continue forever. Sex being twisted is always going to be a problem. Evil is always going to be prevalent in this world.
Yeah.
But you don't stop fighting. You don't stop, because look at the good work that you're doing. In a few short years, look at the good work that you're doing. It can be done. And you're setting such a beautiful example. I just want to affirm you again and hope that you just keep going. And I really want people to understand that they can do this too. Where would you point people in the direction first? I mean, where is there the most work to be done, would you say? Where should our focus be right now?
Oh, I think this category, for sure. I think I could work on this topic every day for the rest of my life, and it still wouldn't be enough. There's so much work to do when it comes to fixing, like the judicial system and sex crimes. I think family court is also wrapped up into this, and trafficking, as I'm sure you know, that's another piece. I think that with getting people started too, if you present something and you're overly affirmed, oh, this is a great idea, we should definitely do this. No, that is no, do not engage. If you bring something forward and you're immediately met with hesitation and they're apprehensive to work on this, that's where you need to go.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that. That's such great advice. Because
so if you're bringing something forward that they're agreeing on right off the top, then that means a couple different things. It may not be effective. It may be empty language that appears to look good, but they know, haha, joke's on you. Go ahead and look like you're doing something, even though this is not really doing anything. I would truly say if you're not pissing somebody off, then you're not going down the right path.
That's going to motivate some people to do it right there. I like that a lot.
I mean, and not the people that you think would get mad. For example, everything I do, I'm sure it enrages sex offenders. I mean, their mommies come after me, their prosecutor or their attorneys, prosecutors come after me. And I just stand there and think, oh, well, I must be doing something right for all of you to take time out of your day to come fight this. There must be a reason. It must be really detrimental to your greater plan or your job. Wow. They don't like it. And so if you're not being met with just an overwhelming opposition, then you're probably not doing the right thing.
Yeah. That is so good to hear. I mean, it's good to know, because that's just immediately kind of demasking a lot of what happens in the justice system and politically too. You're a parent. You got a whole bunch of kids. And,
5.
Yeah, that's a bunch. And you're probably one of the best examples I could think of, like a really fierce mama bear, right? You're probably got those eyes going all the time, ears on alert. What would you say to parents, other parents, and just loved ones of kids? How can they best protect kids right now in this culture, in this climate, and with the vulnerabilities that we have? What are the signs to look for, and what direction would you point them in?
So I'm going to segue into that, because I think I grew up in a great home. My parents were overly involved. Like I said, my mom worked at the school that I was being sexually abused at. I mean, she was a building away from the closet I was being locked in. and she couldn't save me because she didn't know. My parents didn't know. And they were great parents. And of course, they told me, if anybody ever touches you or does anything, tell us. Well, that's not, it doesn't just happen. It's very rare that a perpetrator just does something to you out of nowhere. It is a very slow process. It's why it's called grooming. Mm-hmm. They target their victim, they isolate them, they go through all these process, the whole process of grooming that we are now seeing more and more of. But the reason that I wanted to lead with that is because I truly believe we have to stop putting adult responsibilities onto children. We cannot put that responsibility onto them. And it sounds so backwards. Like, well, then what am I supposed to do if I don't tell that? How am I supposed to, what's going to make them tell me? Like, a child is not responsible for an adult's actions. So with that, I think as a parent in today's world, not just when it comes to this specific topic, I think in general, if your children don't feel like you're listening and like you care about the small things that, let's be honest, are sometimes painful to sit through and listen. I mean, it just could not be any more dull and boring. And we don't care because it's so small in life. But if they don't feel like that is important to you when it's so important to them, they're not going to tell you the real important big things. Why would they? Mom didn't even care about this. So why would I tell her about that? And that would be if that makes sense, that would be my advice to parents, is start really young, listening to the small things and making your kids truly feel like what they're telling you is important and that it does actually matter, so that they feel comfortable and safe so that they can tell you the big things as well.
Absolutely. I want everyone to hear that so clearly. What you just said, we cannot put adult responsibilities onto kids. Do you remember what it was to be 8 years old or 9 years old? I mean, and think about trying to take something like that on. It's just, we can't do that to them. And we've got to be watching, know exactly who they're around, and just be so involved in their lives. I don't care if someone calls me a helicopter parent. Heck yeah, I'm a helicopter parent. I'm going to be that kind of mama bear, and I'll argue that all day long. And
yeah, absolutely.
And not apologize for it, because these are our kids and it is our responsibility. You know, God gives kids as a gift and a reward, and we have the responsibility to protect them. And, you know,
I have the chills. Yeah, absolutely.
If there's that
it's our job.
Yeah. If there's that gap, then there's that space, and you're not filling it as a parent with just what you said, figuring out what's going on with your child, giving him or her the ability to come to you, somebody else is going to fill it.
Yes.
And that's the really terrifying part.
I think too, you know, if our kids don't feel like we're standing up for them when they need to be protected, and it may be something a little bit smaller, maybe an adult was disrespectful or had a bad tone, but if you're witnessing that and you're not letting your child know, hey, you're not worthy of fighting for or addressing this, they're not going to trust or expect you to fight for them for the big things. They're not going to feel safe enough to, and that sounds horrible. And you could think, and you may be a great parent, but if they feel like that little piece has been, it's not little, it's actually huge. If that piece has been neglected and they don't feel that safety with you, they're not going to tell you these things, and they're not going to be open with you. So a lot of people think I'm too open with my kids. I beg to differ. And I think that terminology is huge. I don't think that manipulating terms and body parts and things, I think it's really important for our children to know that those things, and that have those more, I don't want to say adult conversations, but more mature conversations with our children.
Sure.
If we're not telling them, who is?
Yeah. Right, exactly. And here's the other thing that we're dealing with today that we didn't as much have to worry about when we were younger. You know, when we were kids, it was like, you have this range of trusted adults that you can go to, and teachers were one of them, right? You have your church, you have a fireman, a policeman. There was this community of people you could rely on if something was wrong. So if your parents are not available for whatever reason, you had other resources, and kids don't have that as much right now. Some of the really lucky ones do have a village and a big network. But again, you know, I think sometimes we forget to tell our kids things. We forget to say things out loud. We think them, and it's so important just to take a minute and just be like, I will protect you at all costs. I'm here. You can tell me anything. I will believe you. Just these simple statements to give them that safety and assurance that they have advocates in their parents, and those are safe people. So I'm really glad that you're saying that, and it's so critical that we have to watch out for our kids. They are super vulnerable now more than ever for a number of reasons.
Yes.
Kayleigh, if people want to get involved in the work that you're doing in helping modify Kayleigh's law or take it to the next step, or just the work that you're doing in your life, how can they do that? Where can they go?
So my website is becauseyoustillmatter.com. And that is my slogan. And that stemmed from, I had 3 weeks to process the time I found out my abuser was petitioning to get off his lifetime probation. And then the time I actually had to face him in court. And I thought, why am I doing this? Why am I putting myself through this? Well, because you still matter. That's why. And that has been what has pushed me to fight for victims, because you still matter. There is that initial trauma that's awful, but what comes later is horrific, and it does resurface, and it never goes away. And so I will always fight for victims because you still matter. And to help join that fight, I'm working in as many states as possible for Kayleigh's law. Currently, it has been filed in Missouri, California, Wyoming, and Virginia. And I have drafts in 9 other states. But until they're filed, I don't get excited.
Right.
That's just never get excited. And even then, it's a little, But if you are in another state where you would be interested in getting this lifetime restraining order, or permanent protection order, or injunction, if you have, as a constituent, it really helps to have a constituent from that state reach out to one of your elected officials to be the bill sponsor for this and really lead the way with fighting for this protection for victims. And every state needs this law. Victims everywhere, they deserve this protection. Also, I'm really active on Instagram, is where I'm most active. I try to share all the things of all the laws that appear to be happening, but they're really not, because I want laws in place that are in actuality, not just that are being portrayed as something that's happening. And I think, too, I want to encourage everybody to get involved in this, but also anything when it comes to these laws in your state. Don't just read the headlines and the bill titles. You have to go in and read the language and understand what is actually happening within all the words that are in the bills. Because if you don't, then you can't understand what's happening with the law. And so what you're being told may not be at all what's going on. Yeah. So I'm always grateful for support. I have merch too, 1412 clothing, very anti-pedophile merch.
I love it. Where can people find that? Do you have a site where we can shop?
Yes. So because you still matter, it's on there, but it's 1412clothingco.com. And all that goes to help fund my mission for fighting for this topic and for victims. And there's under Kayleigh's law, and even then some. I'm working on all kinds of laws and propositions for the next time we work on props. And I'm really grateful for prayers always, because this is a very daunting category. It's very personal, and my soul is tired. I don't even sugarcoat it anymore. But if not me, then who? And clearly God has chosen me to walk this path and fight this battle. And I have to listen to that and draw my strength from him.
You are a warrior for sure, in every sense of that word. We will be praying for you. And I really encourage people to check out the Because You Still Matter website, go shop, and support in every way that you can. And I love that your story just highlights and reminds us really that our elected officials work for us. Pick up the phone, set a meeting, go in, ask questions. They're there for us to get this work done and answer those questions. So Kayleigh, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and just sharing your story. It is beyond inspirational. And I really hope that this will motivate people to support the work that you're doing and try to, pick up that mantle and forge their own path to make things better in their own community. So I hope that you'll come back on the show again and update us on the work that you're doing. But thank you so much for coming on Politically Basic today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Politically Basic. We're committed to breaking down the basics so that you get to decide. Be sure to check us out at politicallybasic.com and follow us at Politically Basic so you don't miss an episode. And we will see you next time.